Live! Yay! And we're here. So are people already. Welcome, everybody. Happy Sunday afternoon for most people, I think, that will be here. Maybe evening if you're coming from Europe. You're hopping on across the seas. Or early hours of the morning if you're in Australia. I have sometimes some Australia people that hop on, but usually I'm at night, so it's different. But I don't think we'll have any of those today. Hi, everybody.
Hello. Thank you for having us.
Hi.
I'm so glad that you're here. I'm so glad they're here. We're gonna just like chit chat for like a minute or two just to allow people to hop on. Hi, Rainey, and Elizabeth, and Kim, and Tiffany, and Jane, Debbie, all the people. Hello, thanks for coming. Hope that you guys had fun reading this first section of Mere Christianity. We are going to have so much fun chatting about it today. I was telling the girls my goal is as close to an hour as we can. I want to be respectful of Mother's Day and your time. And we lost Amy. Not Amy. We lost Becca. Hopefully Becca hops back in. I will keep an eye out for when she gets back. Yeah, so our goal is to try to keep it as close to an hour as possible. If we go over a little, that's okay. But I think with this first section, we could do it. Maybe as it gets farther in the book, we will take a little bit longer. But yeah, that's the plan. That's the plan for today. I know we're all pretty chatty, so we'll see. We'll see how that goes. I think we can do it. Yeah, we'll wait just a couple minutes more. How was everybody's Sunday? Did anybody do anything special for Mother's Day already today, or get breakfast in bed, Kelly?
Well, my kids, they told me to stay in bed until they were ready. And then I went out there and they had helped Daddy make cinnamon rolls. Because my little.
Nice.
So they helped make cinnamon rolls.
Yeah.
And,
yeah. Cute.
And so it was cute. So we had kind of a special breakfast with
nice
that kind of stuff.
Oh,
nice.
I spent the weekend telling my nephews I was up north with my parents and my sister and her family, and I spent the weekend telling my nephews that they had to make cards for my sister. And they're like, my sixth grade nephew, my mom knows I love her.
Gotta love it.
Well, this is great, Colin, but you didn't put love, Colin. I tell her that every day. Okay. Yeah. But
how about you, Danny?
Yeah, so nothing too crazy. I just did some errands, like I kind of said before we started. I am a big thrifter, so I was at Goodwill helping my stepdaughter find some shorts for the summer. And then, you have to go to the book section. So I was able to find a copy of our reading for 79 cents. So I was super excited about that. And now I can write all in the margins and underline and highlight. And I'm really excited because my library edition has a bunch of the tabs in it, but it's so much more fun to write in a book when you're really gonna digest it, So yeah. But other than that, we're gonna put some brats on the grill tonight.
Nice.
For those of you who know, I'm from Wisconsin and we're big brat lovers, so it's brat season.
It is here.
Yes.
Finally.
Yay.
Yes.
That's what we had Friday night at the cottage. Brats.
Yeah.
Nice burgers.
Gotta love it. Becca, how has your day been so far?
It's good. We had both my daughters were here today, so my husband cooked on the grill, even though it's raining here. It's been raining all day. He cooked on the grill, so that was nice. And then I went to my parents to see my mom. And yeah, just a quiet, rainy day here.
No, nice. It's no rain here. I've seen a couple people in the comments saying it's pretty rainy where they are as well. Sleet in Ohio. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, in
Ohio.
Yeah. I will. We have a Zoom hopefully, with my mom later this evening. So all of my siblings were kind of all over the place. Only one really lives at home with my mom anymore. So we're going to try to hop on Zoom and chat with her later today. I've been texting her throughout the day, but yeah. All right. Well, we're going to dive in. It's 5 after. Hopefully we'll see if anybody else comes. I mean, we have 30 people here, so I think we're good to go to chat about this book. I'm so excited. So I just want you guys to just introduce yourself, and because some people may not know who you are. Hopefully they do, but if not, introduce yourself and your channel, and then just kind of share your general first impressions. Well, also like your previous experience or relationship with Mere Christianity, if there is any or not. Share that, and then your general kind of feelings about this first section. So we're going to go, I don't know if your screens are the same as mine, probably, but we'll just go clockwise. So Amy, you're right at the middle. Why don't you start us off?
All right. So I'm Amy, and my channel is Amy Bowman. So it's just my name, and I have never read Mere Christianity before. Hold it upside down. And the only C.S. Lewis book I've ever read is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So I was really interested to hear his kind of thoughts. And I've always heard how big he was into imagery of Christianity in the Wardrobe series. And so I'm just really excited to read it and dive deep into it. And I'm liking what he has to say so far, and how he's explaining, like, look, I'm not here to tell you the end all be all, but this is what I have. And listening to him talk about how he sent, I guess, going further, how he sent it to people in different religions, the second book and stuff like that. So I've really enjoyed it so far, digging into it.
Nice.
Freaked my nephews out because they saw the highlighting in my book, and you don't do that to books.
That's funny. Oh, just wait, boys. Just wait.
It's okay.
All
I
right,
swear.
Kelly, how about you? Oh, and by the way, in the comments, go ahead and share what your relationship has been with the book too. Like, is this your first time reading, or is it not your first time, or whatever? So Kelly, we'll go ahead and hear from you.
All right, I'm Kelly from Cozy Reader Kelly, and I had never read it before. This is actually my first time reading any of his nonfiction. I also had only read his fiction in the past, but I've been meaning to. Like, I've had both Mere Christianity and what's it called, Abolition of Man? Is that one of the other big ones? I've had those on my TBR forever because I've wanted to get into his more nonfiction. So pretty exciting to finally get into it. I'm enjoying it so far. I think this first section is very much and feels like a beginning, but I'm enjoying the writing.
Cool. All right, Danny.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Danny. I have a channel on BookTube called Spinelli Speaks. I read a little bit of everything. I have a background in English, both a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. So I've read a lot of different books or essays. And I think my first interaction with C.S. Lewis on the nonfiction side was probably more essay-wise during school. But as a child, I read all of the Narnia, all the series there. And then just recently, I have read, or am reading with Victoria over at Musical Bookworm. We are reading the Space Trilogy, which is C.S. Lewis, where you're integrating, like religion, spirituality with science fiction, which is really interesting. Whereas the Narnia series is fantasy with spiritualism and religion, which is really interesting as well. So this is my first experience with Mere Christianity, and first thoughts is completely absorbed. I love the fact that he comes in, and he does this with so many of his works, is he comes in saying, hey, I am not an expert, though he really is.
Yeah, right.
But this is what I think. I love the fact that he is extremely smart. He is extremely intelligent. He is so well versed in anything that he puts out there. He spent I know a lot more about his personal life background. He spends so much time and effort to make things correct and accurate, even though it's fantasy, even though it's science fiction. He is making an effort to put the ideas out there with some kind of background, whilst also being humble about it, saying, this is just what I feel, or this is what my experience has been. You may feel completely different. And I love that, because as we know, he was originally an atheist, and he has grown and found his faith. And this is the beginning of that journey for anyone else who may be, feeling that same way. And I love the fact that he just comes in with, hey, you can take this for what it is, but this is what I have for you. And I love that. I just love that.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah. I love that how clearly his humility comes through. And yet also that brilliant mind, like just it's a very cool, not dichotomy, but like the way that weaves together, that humility with the intelligence is just very cool. All right, Becca.
Okay, so I'm Becca. My channel is Hicks Picks Books. I've had the channel for about 3 months, but I've been watching BookTube for a lot longer. My previous relationship, we've had a long relationship, Mere Christianity and I. We've had an on and off relationship, we'll say, because I've attempted to read it 3 times. And I get partway through, and I just have needed to talk it through with someone to kind of clarify it in my mind. And I didn't have that before. So when you said you were going to do this, I'm like, oh, finally, I can finish this book. So
Yay!
we have a rocky relationship, Mere Christianity and I, but hopefully, things are smooth this time.
Nice.
I felt the same way, Becca, as you. Just like that, I could read this and I could get some stuff out of it, but if I can't, so I felt the same way when you said you wanted to, Krista, when you wanted to read this book with a group. I was like, yes.
Nice. I love it. And I feel the same way. The first time, so I'm Krista, obviously you're here on my channel. I first read this book in college for an ethics class that I was taking. And I remember getting an A on the paper that I had to write about it, but I didn't remember much about the book itself. And I don't remember, some people who read it in college absolutely loved it. And I don't remember it leaving that strong of an impression on me. I mean, I'm sure I did like it, but I don't think I was developed enough, or I don't know, I was immersed in college life where you're reading so much and writing so many papers. And I was an English major as well, Danny. So it was just like one of the things that I read and wrote about, and it didn't stick with me as I think it will this time. And I think having this kind of small group discussion about it and chatting with people, I think that will help a lot. But as far as general first impressions of this first section, I forgot how readable it is and yet how deep. So it's not difficult to read. I don't have to reread sentences to understand what he's saying, but I do have to pause and okay, what is he saying? every once in a while. And I think that's a fun combination because there's just layers to it. So I think it is the type of book that you could reread at different points of your life and totally get different things out of it. And that's just the brilliance, I think, of C.S. Lewis. Anointing, some may say, right? Like a gift that he's just been given to write in a way that's very accessible and yet very deep. There's such a wealth of information in here and just things to think about. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to dive in. I will, in the description after we're done, I'm not doing it right now, but I found an online study guide. It's pages and pages and pages, but it gives a nice overview of each section and then questions and things to think about as well.
Oh, wow.
It's like designed for small groups, but it was free. It was just a website that I found. So I will put the link to this in the description after we're done today for anybody who might be interested in just having something to kind of follow along with, or maybe a place to take notes as well as like a summary from each chapter and everything. It helped me immensely to have this by my side while I was reading, just to help process and kind of outline things. And it does have some questions in there as well because it's geared for small groups and stuff. But yeah. Anyways, let's dive in. Yay! So we're going to start right off with the preface and the kind of we're going to go, here's for everybody else, like we're going to go through each section, the preface, the foreword, which some people had and some people didn't in their edition. So we will spend just a little time explaining or what we got out of the foreword, and then the 5 chapters. And they're all pretty short, but there's a lot. There's a lot, but our goal is still to keep it an hour. If you guys in the comments have any questions or things that stand out to you, like please join the conversation. I can put questions up on the screen. Yeah, join us as we kind of go through this. Participate as much as you can, or just hang out and listen and absorb as much as you can. So I'll start with the preface. What stands out to you from the preface? Were there specific quotes or things? I know Amanda says this was her favorite part of the whole section, the preface. So the preface is C.S. Lewis after the fact, coming in and explaining kind of why he wrote this and his thoughts of what was important about this book. So I'll let you guys just kind of take it away for a second. Like what stands out to you from this preface?
I kind
For
of agree
me-
with Amanda. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Becca. No.
Okay. I kind of agree with Amanda. I think this might have been my favorite part because he gave an illustration. It was really helpful to me through the whole first book here, that after he kind of explained the deep part, and then he would give like a real life illustration to kind of apply. That made it so much easier for me. And so when he was talking in the preface about the purpose for the book, and he compared it to being a hallway, and then his purpose is to get people into the hallway, and then there are all the doors on the hallway, and they determine then which door they need to go through based on truth and based on fact. But his purpose isn't to get them into a specific door; it's to get them into the hallway,
right?
The Christianity part, and then they go from there.
Yeah.
And I liked how he said, then you have to be kind to those people that have chosen different doors than you, because they're in the same house as you. Like, just because they're in a different room, they're in the same house. And you have to be nice to those that are still in the hallway, because they need to pick a door and they need to get a room. And it's not okay for us to make them feel like they shouldn't pick any door. Like, we don't want them to leave the house. So we need to be kind to all of them. I just loved all of that imagery. It was so beautiful. And just like, I mean, I'm an English teacher, so like that kind of metaphor, simile and metaphor just like blows my mind every time.
Yeah.
I'll just take it and go with it.
I think I come to the preface as more of an overall idea, in the sense that C.S. Lewis is one of those few authors who have had the opportunity to explain himself in several of his works. He was an author who was publishing during his life. So he had a lot of opportunity to explain himself and say, okay, so this was published and this was how it was received, but this is what I meant by that. And I appreciate what readers have said. So for me, in the preface, when he says, so far as I can judge from the reviews and from the numerous letters written to me, which I love that, because he was huge about letters. That's how he met his wife, through letters. The book, however, faulty in other respects, so he recognizes that he has faults, which I love. You know, a lot of authors are like, there's nothing wrong with it. He said, did at least succeed in presenting an agreed or common or central or mere Christianity, which I think is so true to the conversation, because it's not mere in the sense of this is nothing, this is just this little thing. It's mere in the fact that everyone is going to pick a different door. So I really just love the fact that we get that little glimpse of the author, because there's a lot of times where, in the sense of like classics, which this is more of a modern classic, but it's written in a different context. It's written in almost a different language. And you have these study groups breaking it apart and trying to figure out, what did they mean by this? What is the allegory here? What is the metaphor here? What were they trying to say? And he has the opportunity to say, this is what I meant. And I love that. I love that.
I did too. And even the relational way that he's like, these were originally talks that I did on the radio, and so colloquialisms or like contractions even that I would say when I would be speaking, I changed it for the book, or words that I emphasized when I was speaking, I would put it in italics for the sake of the book. Just that, I don't know, it felt so relational that he was really reaching beyond the page to help us understand him and his style even of writing. I don't know, I thought that was kind of, it made it feel more personal, like he was just talking to me and explaining how he was writing.
Even then, how he went back then and said, but then I thought that was a mistake. So
I love that.
It's like,
I like the italics, but then I took them out.
That's funny.
Like, here's my whole thought process. Here's everything you never really needed to know, but you're going to be glad I told you. Like, I just loved that, how he just let us into that whole thing.
Yeah, I liked a little after that, when he was talking about different denominations, how he said he did have some omissions. Like, I don't know what all he talks about specifically in the beliefs, but he said, he specifically kept some things out because he's like, well, I can't speak on those personally. Like, I've never had a problem with gambling, so I can't tell you advice. I'm not a woman. I can't talk about birth control. And I like that it goes back to what Danny was saying earlier about his humility, that like, he's like, well, I haven't experienced those walks of life, so I can't like say this is how it relates to Christianity in general, because it's not something that's going to happen in my life.
Right. And I also loved the kind of breaking down of the word Christianity, comparing it to the word gentleman, and how a lot of times we're starting to use Christianity as a judgmental word. Like, are they acting Christian, or is it just a thing, being a Christian? Like the word gentleman, being a gentleman was just a fact at one point, like a status in society. It had nothing to do with someone's character or integrity or whatever, but it has become this other thing. When you use the word gentleman, it becomes a compliment that you're giving someone because of the way that they're acting, where he's like that. And then it makes the word gentleman useless. It makes the word itself a useless word. He says we have to be careful about doing that with the word Christianity. You might have someone be a good Christian or a bad Christian, which we shouldn't be doing, because we're not to judge other people. We don't know the status of their heart, but we have to be wary of using that word as a way to describe somebody's actions and behaviors, as opposed to what it is to be a Christian at its core. So I liked that comparison. I thought that was kind of cool, because you do see that in our society these days. Like, I think when he was writing in the 1940s, the being called a Christian is very different than today society, where it's not such a positive thing anymore because of the ways that we've seen so many people be hurt by the church or whatever. It just doesn't have the same meaning. But that's the danger that he was describing. Like, instead of just using the word Christian and as being a fact of someone's beliefs and not their actions, I like that. I just enjoyed that comparison.
I think what was nice too about reading this was from the get-go, it's almost like you were set right. You know, like we have our inherent ideas, we have our built-in ideas, we have our experiences, we have all of these things that make us who we are and make us believe what we're going to believe. And we are human. We immediately judge every person we come in contact with. And when I started the audio on this, as soon as I was hearing these words, I was like, whoa, I do some of this. I do that. That, yes. And it offset my equilibrium. And I was like, oh, thank you for like slapping me in the face a little bit and be like, yeah, come back to center. You know, you got to get off that little high horse of yours. You know what I mean? Like, you know, for some of us, it's taking the moment to read books like this to reset, you know, even if you only get one thing out of it. Yeah. You remember, you're like, oh yeah, I've been kind of a jerk a little bit lately. So I really liked the beginning of that because it really was like, ooh, thanks, Lewis.
Yeah, exactly. Let's move into the foreword, which we won't take too long on because it really just kind of sets up and then summarizes. But what I appreciated is the reminder that this was originally a set of talks that C.S. Lewis did on the radio. He was asked to kind of explain Christianity during World War II. So these talks happened between, well, I think in 1942 to 1944. So over this 2-year period, he did a series of talks on the radio, which, can you imagine, like, your radio is what you have to find out your information of what's going on in the world. So you're hearing all of this war talk all the time. And then here comes C.S. Lewis talking about Christianity, like, and what it is at its core. And that kind of blew my mind, first of all. And then as we got into the book, it was very interesting, like some of the anecdotes and stories and analogies that he made had a different connotation, knowing that he's writing this in the midst of World War II. I just thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
Anyone else have anything that just stood out to you from the foreward?
Yeah, for me, there was one. Oh, sorry, Danny, but there was one part where it's a woman that does the forward. She was saying that the mere Christianity of C.S. Lewis is not a philosophy or even a theology that can be considered, argued, or put away on a shelf. It's a way of life. And then she quotes from Lewis saying that there are no ordinary people, that it is immortals whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit. And when you think about that, you know, like immortals, you know, like if we are Christians and believe in heaven and like eternal life, I mean, it puts it almost in a different perspective, like to use that word, that it's immortals that we are interacting with each time we interact with a person.
Yeah. Danny, what were you going to say?
I just like the point too, and it's on that same page, Kelly, too, where he refers to himself, or she brings up that he refers to himself as an amateur. He's not a beginner, or he's a beginner and not an old hand. So he's not coming from a place of, you know, I know everything there is to know about this topic. He is just as much an amateur as we are.
And then I love right at the end of the foreword, it says, the Christianity Lewis espouses is humane, but not easy. It asks us to recognize that the great religious struggle is not fought on a spectacular battleground, but within the ordinary human heart. When every morning we wake and feel the pressures of the day crowding in on us, and we must decide what sort of immortals we wish to be. I love that. That's like, oof. Okay. Yeah. Without further ado, let's dive in.
I'm just reading Amanda's favorite line in the preface. It has everything available, yeah. I love that.
Except that of being useful. Yeah, talking about the word Christianity and how you can change it if you change the meaning of it, because every available body except being useful. I did appreciate a little bit of sarcasm that you can hear in his tone every once in a while. I loved that when I noticed. Like, oh, that's a little passive aggressive there, or a little sarcasm coming out. I loved it, which just makes it again feel so relatable. And so, like, I'm just sitting down with somebody who's way smarter than me, but like listening to him talk about it. I love that.
Well, and especially if you think back to, this is during the Blitz, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So they're recording these talks at BBC. Now, BBC is central London, which is where most of the attacks were. My guess is they were probably in the basement, as far as they could go, without, cutting off that radio connection. But to think, to have a chat about mere Christianity, while it's in your mind, you're thinking, is tonight going to be another, air raid? Am I going to be able to get to a bunker fast enough? And same for his listeners.
Yeah.
We're not talking about, now we're talking about our soul, our souls and how but just to think, like, everyone's on edge. So this was probably a reprieve of like, oh, thank you.
Let's think about something else for a minute.
Yeah. Just amazing.
And sit down with Uncle Clive, Uncle CS, and have a chat about my soul, right?
And what a great speaker as well. He was I've heard radio clips. So very, very well spoken.
Yeah. Very cool. All right. So chapter 1, oops, I'm not editing it. I want to show it. Was the law of human nature. And I think the biggest, there was like 2 main ideas in this chapter. One, there's a universal law of human nature, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But then also, it's universally broken. We don't follow it. We have the choice. It's the only law of nature that we have a choice to follow or not follow. So I think there's a lot to unpack here. Like, as far as, do we agree that there is a law of human nature? The distinction, this is one of the big things between straight laws of nature and then the law of human nature or moral law. He kind of interplays those 2 type names of it, like a moral law or the law of human nature. So do you guys have any, like, I mean, there's so many quotes and things to pull out, but from this chapter, well, does one of you want to take this one on, first of all, just describing the difference between a law of nature and then the law of human nature? Like, what's the difference of those?
I will. I'll do that one.
Go for it.
So he was saying that laws of nature are like the rules of like sciencey type thing, like gravity. If you drop a rock, it's going to behave the same way every single time. It doesn't have the option of choosing not to fall.
Right.
Those are going to happen every single time. That's a law of nature. Moral law, like you said, is the one where we have the option. We know what we ought to do, but we have the option of choosing whether we do it or not. And it's not something that it's something that everybody feels. It's not just certain people have that sense of right and wrong. Everybody feels it, but we all individually choose whether we follow that law of human nature, where the law of nature is getting followed 100% of the time, all the time. We're, hit or miss basically on the law of human nature. And arguing, I like when he pointed out that arguing means that there is some sort of right or wrong. If there wasn't, there would be nothing to argue about.
Right.
So I like his realistic examples of, he's so logical. Everything that he says, then he puts it into a situation. It's like, oh, yeah, that makes complete sense. And arguing is a perfect example, I think.
Yeah, like, this is proof. Like, here's proof for you that this exists. And we talk about like proof, you know, like what's your proof that this exists? Well, like it's right there. That's the first thing you talked about. Here's your proof that there's a right and a wrong. We argue and we have ideas about what's right and what's wrong. And I thought that was really interesting.
I think what stood out to me the most was, you know, he would kind of come up with these questions that like people would attack him with, like things like, well, there are different cultures and every culture has a different moral law. And he's like, well, no, if you really look at even ancient cultures or like different religions, if you look at, I mean, he lists a bunch of like Egyptians, Hindus, Chinese, Greeks, and Romans, that, yeah, there are things different, but there is an underlying moral law that like all human cultures go by, and that we aren't as different as we think we are.
Mm-hmm. Like even that thought that some cultures have one wife and some cultures have more than one wives, but all universally, if you have a wife, you treat her like this, whether it's one wife or multiple wives, that kind of thing. Yeah.
And I like how he often brought it back to being unselfish, because that's such a universal thing, to not just think about yourself, but how does what you're doing affect other people? Because no matter how that is walked out, that's kind of a universal, you should not be selfish. Like that's a universal type of thing.
Yeah.
There is a quote that he has. It says, if we do not believe in decent behavior, why should we be so anxious to make excuses for not having behaved decently? So thinking you're doing something right, but you're still thinking like, I don't know if that was really right. That is that inherent struggle between right and wrong that he is stating is why there is this human law, this moral law that everyone has no matter what, you know. And like you said, with the traditions in different religions, it's there, but is what's happening a learned thing? And I think we get into that in the next piece where he talks about like teachers and parents and how you learn certain things. But there is something within us that is just inherently, we know what makes us feel good and we know what makes us feel uncomfortable. And that is the difference between what is right and wrong.
I like Tiffany's comment that she made. She said, we always expect people to follow the laws of nature toward us, but we make excuses as to why it doesn't apply to us, and why, you know, we always have an excuse for why we didn't do what we know is right. But when someone does that to us, why, you know, it's a big deal. But when we do it, we downplay it.
Yeah.
And I think you can see that in the way children interact. Like if anybody is around children or has children, like I have little kids, you know, they haven't gone to school, they haven't learned, you know, all this stuff, but they know if one of them does something bad and the other one comes to me, and then, you know, the one that did that thing bad was like, oh, but she did this to me. And like, it's always like pushing off the blame. And they're saying that because they feel bad. Like they feel bad about what they did. And I think you can just see that. And like kids just say exactly like what we're thinking as adults. Cause we think the same thing. We're like, well, she did it to me first.
I love it.
Yeah. I see that a lot in the classroom. The I need you to stop doing this. Well, why are you talking to me when you can talk to him about what they're doing? I'm like, well, actually, I'm on my way over there, but you're first. So yeah, I mean, we did.
Before we move on to the next chapter, I just want to say, I wanted to point out something that like sometimes you're reading something and it connects to something else. And this week I was reading this, and then I started The Count of Monte Cristo, and like there was a point where it was like, oh my gosh, this is 100 years earlier, and I'm not gonna like give anything away of where this was, but it was just two characters talking about the potential of murder. And this one character says, but mankind, on the contrary, like he had originally said that a tiger has no problem killing because that's his instinct. But mankind, on the contrary, is repelled by blood. It is not the laws of society that condemn murder, but the laws of nature. And I'm just like,
I love it.
Don't you love when that happens? Yeah.
He just recently
very
connected
cool.
this week. So
Love
that
it.
was awesome.
I love
Or
it.
you've never heard of a book before, but then all of a sudden you're reading a different book, and then like that book gets mentioned like I love that.
Nice. Okay,
Welcome
before we
back,
move on, any
Becca.
other? Yeah, welcome back, Becca.
Thanks. I
Let's
don't know what's going on
let's
today.
go. I mean, we kind of started to talk about some objections. So I love like the second chapter. He's like, okay, well, we've established that there is a universal law and that we don't keep it. We break it all the time. But here's some objections that people have said as to why there's not a universal law. So he talks about that herd instinct. It's just a cultural thing or a learned thing instead of just a given. And then he also, well, those are the two things. The herd instinct and the social convention are the two main objections. But what from this chapter stands out to you, or quotes or whatever?
I think one thing that stuck out.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go
I
ahead.
thought one thing that stuck out to me was when on page 23 in mine, it said, it is a mistake to think that some of our impulses, say mother love or patriotism, are good, and others, like sex or the fighting instinct, are bad. All we mean is that the occasion on which the fighting instinct or the sexual desire need to be restrained are rather more frequent than those for restraining mother love or patriotism. And I thought that was really poignant to say. And, just like you have all these ideas of, I think, and some people have a lot of ideas of how Christians feel about all this is bad and this is bad and this is bad. And, even that isn't necessarily the case all the time.
Yeah, I think he's talking about the difference between our impulse, our instinct, and the moral law. Like those are not one and the same thing.
Right.
I loved when he compared it to music, because I love music. Mm-hmm. So when he's like, the moral law tells us the tune that we're supposed to play, and our instincts are the keys. So those are the different notes, but the music is the overall thing, and we can choose to play the music that's in front of us or not. Like we still have that choice. But I loved that that musical analogy, because I can relate to that.
Like where there is a specific time that you're supposed to play this key, and you can choose not to play that key or not, but there's a time in the moral law that you're supposed to play it. I liked that analogy a lot.
I'm not sure if this was in the reading, but when I was reading this section, it made me really think about when people discuss the difference between fight or flight, and the way that could be, well, that's right or wrong. I'm going to fight for my life, or I'm going to flight. But that's a choice you make within a certain situation. It doesn't make one of them right or wrong, because they could both be right or they could both be wrong.
Right.
So it's having these, it's our, as much as it is our innate, good or bad, we have that feeling. We know what that is. It's in us. We also have this innate ability to make excuses or make examples of why we do it this way. And we think we try to make those as tight as we can, as, well, I know the difference between right and wrong because this is why I chose this. No. They're not one and the same. They're completely different conversations. Yeah. But we use our inherent knowledge of right and wrong to say, well, this is why I did that. So for this section, it was really interesting to almost put a mirror up and say, why did you make that decision? Are you trying to, say, well, I was making a decision between right and wrong? No, you were trying to make yourself feel better about the decision you made.
Yeah.
Regardless of if it was right or wrong.
Right. Yep. And then later, when he's talking about not just the instincts, but the social conventions, he's like, as soon as the moment you say that one set of moral ideas can be better than another, you are in fact measuring them both by a separate standard. So the convention itself is not the law. It's you're
Right.
measuring it by a higher standard because you're comparing between two things. So those two things cannot be truth and untruth per se. Like the truth is a separate thing that you're then measuring these two things against. So that in itself proves that there's something, this moral law that's higher or above in some way than these other two things. Morality, real morality, admitting that there is such a thing as a real right, independent of what people think, and that some people's ideas get closer to real right than others.
That's the part that stood out to me too.
I like how he makes these arguments so logical. Like you said earlier, it is easy to read. Like sometimes I had to go back to kind of read and be like, yeah, okay, that totally makes sense. Because if I were to have this same argument, I might have the exact same thoughts as him, but I can't get it out. Like I start just going off on a tangent, not being able to make any sense. But and the fact that he did this in a radio talk, like he was talking, I mean, he probably had notes, but still it just is like, I'm just laying out these logical steps. Like this is just makes sense.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Anything else from this chapter? I think those were all the things that I underlined. So the question that is in my my book, my study guide is, do moral laws then change over time? Or is it just their application that might change? What do you think about that?
That's a really good question.
Right?
Because
Go
life has, so from the dawn of man, we're assuming this inherent right and wrong, right? So what changes about that? I love the fact that I feel like every time I answer a question, I answer it with a question, because he does the same thing.
Yes,
he
he
does
does.
the same thing. He gets these questions from his, readers or whomever, and he goes, but what about this? And you're like, oh, but you didn't answer my question. But what about this?
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's in this chapter or not, but there was that example he did at one point about the Salem witch trials, where
That was this chapter.
Yeah.
Okay, so where he's saying that you don't know what you don't know, basically, is what he was saying. That if we knew that witches were these horrible people, blah blah, would it be wrong to have done that? But they didn't know that witches didn't exist. And I was like, I never would have thought of the witch trials in that way. I mean, you think of it, they're horrible what they were doing, because obviously killing is wrong. But like you said, over time, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And
where it would have been a completely okay for them to be getting rid of these witches if they were actually, in fact, horrible people that were putting hexes and trying to kill their neighbors using potions and spells and all of that thing. That wouldn't have been beyond the realm of goodness to get rid of that evil. But what they were doing was getting rid of an evil that didn't actually exist. Right. So as our beliefs change in terms of what we find out, in terms of what science tells us, and in terms of what facts become available to us, then it can actually change, where, we do the best we can with the information that we have in front of us. And the same thing we've done for all of our jobs for years and years and years. We handle our job, and me in teaching, I teach my kids in the way that is the best practice possible. And as I learn more, I change my teaching to be what I know to be the best that I can give my students. And if I know that I'm doing something that could harm my students, then, I'm doing something wrong. But if I'm not realizing that it's harming my students, then it's not. So as I get more information and find more facts, then I'm actually changing that definition.
Yep.
I think
Does that make
Absolutely.
any sense at all?
That's the
ahead, Becca.
application. I would think that's like the application.
Right.
The way we apply the moral law, I think, changes maybe too much sometimes. I think the actual moral law itself doesn't change because it's at this point he's not calling it God, but it's what whatever this power is, whatever it put inside of all of us.
Right.
That doesn't change, but I think that the way we react to it changes, or the way we wish it was changes.
Yeah.
You know, depending on, I mean, society certainly wishes, you know, that they could make it whatever they want it to be. But I think that it itself, I don't think changes. I think we change.
Right. Yeah. I agree. I think absolutely. I don't think, from understanding what he has here, moral law never changes. Because we can look back in history and we can see all of everyone who has decided what is right and wrong, and how society has made that move forward. And as the people within those time eras facilitated that, because they thought, well, that's what's right. You know, I mean, and there's so many different tangents. There's, you know, the civil rights movement. There's a lot, you know, sacrifices in general, you know, in religious history. It's all done out of what we believe is right, based on what the people of power deem so at that time. But the moral law, what is inherently within us, has never changed.
Yeah.
And even in this conversation, can we really say, well, these are the actions that are right and wrong,
Right.
based off of moral law? We can't.
Right.
We just know inherently what is and isn't.
Yeah. I love how he words it. There's no difference of moral principle here in talking about the witches and how we don't anymore execute witches, right? There's no difference of moral principle here. The difference is simply about matter of fact. It may be a great advance in knowledge not to believe in witches. There is no moral advance in not executing them when you don't think that they're there. You would not call a man humane for ceasing to set mousetraps if he did so because he believed there was no mice in the house. So I love, like, it's not the moral principle that's changing, like we've just been talking about. It's our knowledge that has advanced to allow us to see that moral principle in a different way, because we don't have to act on that moral principle when we understand, okay, witches aren't a thing that we need, like, we don't need to execute people because we don't believe, or whatever. We don't need to set mousetraps if I don't believe there's mice in the house. Why would I set out mousetraps? There's no point in that, because it's just, I love that example as well. Kelly, thank you for bringing that one up about the witches. I couldn't remember if that was this chapter either.
Yeah, I didn't highlight it, so I just remembered it mine.
Yeah, it was a good one. Moving on to the reality of the law. Dun, dun, dun. Put it into practice. Sort of. And this is, so the summary on my study guide. The overall ideas of this chapter: the fact that humans do not follow their own nature has a consequence. There are consequences to not following this moral law. We try to explain away our failure to follow because it is so odd, not necessarily what is the most convenient to us. And then moral law must represent some different form of reality. So it's just kind of putting into practice, what does this look like in every day as we start walking it out? What stands out to you from this chapter?
I think what stood out for me the most was he brings up more of that topic of being unselfish, which was really big for me, because it brings back that topic of continuing to make those excuses. If you were unselfish, you wouldn't be thinking about yourself when you get caught, I guess, in a situation where you you probably did not make the best moral decision. So instead, what you do is you say, well, this and this and this. But if you based your reaction off of being more unselfish, you would be closer to that moral law. So I like that came up, because I think what he's saying here too is you really need to think about what you do and what you say and how you feel and why you feel. And all of it comes back to, are you really being unselfish, or are you just being selfish, you know? So I liked that a lot.
I really liked how he said that, for the most part, and right before he talked about why ought I be unselfish, he says, and we say it's good for society to be unselfish, but right before that, he said, what we understand is that you cannot have real safety or happiness except in a society where everyone plays fair, and it is because they see this that they try to behave decently. So if everybody is acting unselfishly, then everybody is benefiting, and that's like why that moral law exists. That's on page 29 in my book. I don't know if that. So they're all different. So
Yeah, they are. That's okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if he'll bring this up later in his writing, because this is my first experience with Mere Christianity, but I wonder if he will at all venture into the topic of why it is easier to choose to make an excuse, why it is easier to be selfish. Because that, I think, in this first section was why like a question I had. So if we have this inherent, moral law, why is it so easy for us to not go down that path of righteousness, I guess? And that sounds like too powerful of a word, but so much of us is selfish. And I'm just going to put it out there. So much of us is selfish.
Yeah.
And why is it easier to be like that? Why is it so easy for us to think about ourselves before we think about others? And I really hope he gets into that somewhere in the writing, because I think that is a really interesting topic. Because I don't know if the answer is just that it is easier.
Yeah. And I think he will, because at this point, he's just establishing that there is a law of human nature. Like there is this not overpowering, but that there is this truth that is, that it's there. It's a fact. It was put there. I mean, we're not getting to who put it there yet until the next couple chapters, but like there is this overarching universal law of nature. And I think we will get into like the Christianity side of it, where we talk about sin and being born into a sinful world and having that sin nature. I think he does, if I remember correctly. I could be totally wrong, but I think he will get into more details of Christianity, like more specific. As of right now, he's setting up, you can't, because he says at one point, I think it's towards the end of chapter 5, like you can't dive right in with someone talking about sin and the power of Jesus and forgiveness if they don't believe in the first place that there is a universal right and wrong. If someone doesn't believe that there's a universal right and wrong, then it doesn't matter to them that Jesus came, sacrificed himself, like all the things that is foundational to a Christian belief doesn't matter to somebody who doesn't believe, first of all, that there's this universal right and wrong, and that we don't follow it a lot of the time. Like that we understand that it's there, but we don't do it. If they don't have that understanding that we're all sinners, like in Christianese or Bible speak, like we are all sinners, right? Like we understand that as a follower of Christ, but for somebody who doesn't have a knowledge of the Bible or belief in the Bible or belief in God for the first place, like we need to start way at the beginning and work to that point where we have an understanding of, oh, I can't in my own self follow this law of human nature perfectly. I just can't do it. We don't do it.
Mhm.
I think he will get there. We're just
Mhm.
starting at the
Right.
very beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the next section, Tiffany says, the next section is called What Christians Believe. So I think we're going to get there. If I remember correctly. I'm trying to think of what else. I didn't underline too much in this section.
No, it felt
Yeah, but
like
that
he
whole
was
idea of
summarizing-
selfishness.
Yeah.
Huh? Go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't highlight much because it felt like he was just summing up what he had said before in order to move on to the
Right.
next point.
Right.
Yeah.
And kind
Because
of
he
looking at it
brought up the difference between like the gravity, the law of gravity. Like it's different than
Right.
laws that
Yeah.
govern nature is different than the law of human nature. Like he just kind of like was reiterating everything.
Right. Yeah, that last paragraph of this section is just, again, summarizing the first couple chapters. The moral law or the law of human nature is not simply a fact about human nature, the same as gravity. It is not a mere fancy. We cannot get rid of the idea. It is not simply a statement of how we would like men to behave for our own convenience, which is what this chapter is about, like that whole selfishness idea. It's just, it's a true thing. It must somehow or other be a real thing, a thing that is really there, not made up by ourselves. And yet it is not a fact in the ordinary sense, the same way of like gravity, like it's just going to happen. It's still a choice that we have. It's something above and beyond the ordinary facts of men's behavior, and yet quite definitely a real law. So yeah, it is kind of like that summary chapter.
Mm-hmm.
So then we move into where do they come from, right? What lies behind the law was chapter 4. So yeah, in this one, there's the two main ideas or views of the universe, and this is where we get into the materialist view, where it all
Just
either happens
coincidentally
by
appeared.
religious, like by random chance, or then the religious view, which is there is some mind or creator behind everything that has purpose and will. So those are the two main ideas of the universe, so which he talks about, and then science can address the how and the what, but not the why. And so he's diving into a little bit of the why in this chapter,
Mm-hmm.
and then how we have the firsthand knowledge because we are humans, not men, but we're humans, right? And we understand this in a different way than we can understand maybe the laws of nature because we have a mind. We experience this on a minute by minute basis. This law of nature, of human nature. Well, go ahead, Amy. What stands out?
Well, what stood out to me was how he was saying that science cannot determine which of those is correct, the materialist or the religious. Like science cannot determine that all these coincidences just took place, or because science can tell you that this big thing happened and it created this, and then we had different things in different eras and different eons, and science can tell us that, but science can't tell us why that happened. And there is no experiment that can help, that would make it possible for science to do it. And I thought that was a really interesting point to make, that science, where he said science, as important of a job as it is, cannot do this thing that we want to use as our, like we want to use science to help us prove the existence of God or not the existence of God, and not God in this chapter where he's talking about the creator. We can't use science as to help or hinder our standing as to whether it's religious or materialistic.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, Christy makes a good point. He points out that real scientists don't usually make statements about God. It's journalists or pop scientists who want to take that science and make it a statement about God or the lack of God or whatever. Like,
right. Mm-hmm.
I think because as science grew or developed or was discovered, it is used as here's my hypothesis, here's my conclusion. So I need
Right.
a hypothesis, so people, certain minds believe that everything needs that proof, that piece of proof,
Mhm.
the visual proof. You do this happens. And I think as we've been talking in this discussion about the logical, understanding of something, he's making the logical statement of saying God exists because we have moral law.
Mhm.
So he's giving us the proof,
Mhm.
but not using science because they're not the same. They're not on the same level. We're not on the same path. It's not. You don't need one to have the other.
Mhm.
It's very interesting, and it would be really interesting to find out, like, at what point in time did science become the end all example of how to prove things?
Right.
You
Right.
know?
Mhm.
Yeah, and when he compares it to something, he compares it more to math. That it's just this thing that is there. Like science is about discovery and like you said, like pointing out, finding proofs and proving your hypothesis. But math is just there. Like this is what it is. And that's what he's saying about moral law too. That it is more comparative to math than it is to science.
Well, and it exists
Mhm.
without you doing anything with it. It
Yeah.
already exists. So just because you can prove it exists doesn't mean that it doesn't exist without you doing that.
Yeah.
It is
Right.
still there.
Right.
Yeah. Well, kind of like the whole Thomas Edison did not invent electricity, he discovered it. Like this was a thing before it was discovered to be a thing. It was a thing. It just wasn't named, and it wasn't, it still exists whether we have found it or not, or acknowledge it.
I loved the example of like an architect. He says that there's a controlling power outside the universe. It could not show itself to us as one of the facts inside the universe. No more than an architect of a house could actually be a wall or a staircase or a fireplace in that house. So the architect is outside of the building that he has designed. So I know, like, as somebody who does believe God exists, like I can look at nature and see that there is a creator, but doesn't mean the flower is God or something within creation is the creator. There's a little difference there.
I like what it said right after that part, Krista. He said the only way in which we can expect it to show itself would be inside ourselves as an influence or command trying to get us to behave in a certain way. And that's just what we do find inside ourselves.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, same. Christy has this too. If facts and truth are an umbrella, science is under the umbrella, not the umbrella itself.
Mm-hmm.
True. Kind of the same idea, right?
Yeah.
So there's a question at the end of this. I didn't put it in a banner. I should have, but so he's talking about the life force, which we've just decided that there is this force that has created this moral law. He says, is the life force the greatest achievement of wishful thinking the world has yet seen? No. Is this wishful thinking or is it truth? Oh, that's like a thought added after. So this was not part of that whole idea of a life force was not part of his talk on the air. He added it afterwards, which I love.
I know it really allows you to interact almost with his thought process.
Right.
Because he did take the time to interject those extra bits later when something may not have made as much sense as he maybe originally implied. He comes back in publication and puts those notes in there, which I think is really thoughtful because it is such an important topic, and it has been such an important topic throughout his work that I think he didn't want to leave any gaps, which I really love.
Yeah.
When I look at what he said about when he describes what he's calling the life force is a sort of tame God. You can switch it on when you want, but it will not bother you. I think a lot of people a lot of people view God that way.
Yeah.
As they want him to be that way. They want the good stuff, but they don't want the bad stuff. You know, I want him when I want him, but I want him to leave me alone when I don't want him.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he refers to that often as a soft soap. There's a great deal of soft soap talked about God. Like it's just this soft, gentle, like creator in our life that just makes everything happy and good. And I mean, he mentions that in the preface too. That it's not an easy. Where did it go? Right at the end, right?
I'm glad you mentioned that because I didn't know what he meant by there was a lot of soft soap. I'm like, I don't get it. But that makes sense when you say that that's the metaphor,
right?
That people are like looking for that happy, fluffy view. But I was like, what does he mean by soft soap?
Well, and is it in the next section where he talks a little bit about God and his like he's not, it's not always about good. Sometimes he is harsh. Yeah,
that's
we'll move that brings us right into chapter 5, right? Because that's the whole title of it. We have cause to be uneasy. Oh, I loved this chapter. I feel like I underlined or whatever the whole thing. I love progress. Progress means getting nearer the place where you want to be. And if you have taken a wrong turn, then to continue going forward doesn't get you any nearer. If you are on the wrong road, progress means doing an about turn and walking back to the right road. And in that case, the man who turns back soonest is the most progressive man. And then he talks about in math, like if you keep going down the wrong road, that's not progress. You need to stop, go back, find out what the right road is, and then continue on. And I think if I think back to like the picture of the hall, it's like checking out a room. Be like, yeah, this is not the right room for me. I'm not going on the right path by being in this room, so I need to go back into the hallway. Figure out what the truth is in this situation, and then take a step from there, and then that's progress. Near the place.
And going back into the hallway. Going back into the hallway doesn't make you less progressive. It just makes you closer to finding to where you want.
Yeah, absolutely.
To where you want to be. I love
going
when
back
you said there is nothing. Yeah, there's nothing progressive about being peg-headed and refusing to admit a mistake.
I like double underline that.
Yeah, I was like, how many times could I underline this without ruining my book pages?
Yeah.
Because, I mean...
Isn't that so hard to do sometimes? Like, sometimes we're so... I shouldn't say we. I will say I. Sometimes I am
You're safe saying
important. It's so important to me to be right.
Right.
That sometimes, even when I'm wrong... I will stick to my guns about what I'm saying because I want to be right. But if I'm wrong, that's not progressive. That's just being pig-headed. That's not being right. That's being pig-headed. And I think that's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to admit that you're doing something wrong or on the wrong path or whatever. Like, that's just, I don't think anyone has it easy.
Right. Well, and I think changing your mind really does have a negative to it. It has this negative connotation to it where if you all of a sudden say, well, actually, I thought about it and I think this, then you're thought of as being kind of willy-nilly about it instead of, somebody who sticks to their guns and believes what they believe, and you got to respect that they don't, whatever. Well, no, because if they're wrong, then they should admit it and they should change their mind. And it's not being, whimsy and flim-flammy. It's learning new things and coming up with a new solution and being progressive and getting to figure out what the truth is.
And that's where
And-
growth happens, right? That's when we
Right.
are actually growing.
And progressing. Yeah.
Right.
It's actually one of the major themes we have at my workplace, and we call it accountability. You know, when you have done something wrong, and it could be
Mhm.
a simple mistake, but being able to say, that was me,
Yeah.
I did that,
Mhm.
I thought I was doing it the right way, you know, because here's the thing, and this is where his, you know, idea of this path and having to go back is, if you are so pig-headed that you're going to say, yeah, I did something wrong, but I'm going to keep going down this path, you're getting farther and farther away from what is meant to be. So you're not only ruining that path, you're actually ruining several others. You are actually creating a path
More problems.
of more problems. Exactly.
Yeah.
I think for me, when he says, if God is like the moral law, then he is not soft.
Yeah.
And that to me immediately made me think about Narnia, because he chooses Aslan to be a lion, a fierce creature who is all powerful. He has teeth, and he's introduced as this massive, you know, creature, which in most of our minds we're like, ooh, lion, like, ooh, you know, he's going to tear you to pieces. But he's also the godlike figure in that series. And I think that line to me was like, yes, God is not a cushy, you know, Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, ready to, you know, caress you and be like, okay, you know, you did a bad job. No, he is not to forgive. People forgive.
Right.
God is the Almighty, and he knows right, wrong, good, evil. So he is not soft. He is not soft. So I really, it just makes me think about Narnia and how perfect that his embodiment of what the godlike, Christ-like figure is in that book series. So my 2 cents.
Yeah. I think all of that really helped me with you know, that the argument a lot of people say, you know, when somebody, you know, gets sick or died, or, you know, something bad happens in your life, and they're like, how can there be a God
that would let this happen?
Yeah. And I think that he just puts it so plainly that God is good because he is enforcing or putting out there a moral law of being unselfish, of courage, of good faith, and all of these good things, and saying, this is, as people, you should be following this. And if you don't follow it, like, you have that choice. It's not God that's saying that, or it's not God like making you make the wrong choice. Like, he's got the moral law, and then we are deciding whether or not to follow it. And I think that's a great, because, you know, when Christians say God is good, and then somebody comes at you for that, I'm always like, I don't know how to respond in a coherent way. But once again, I don't have the words, but he put the words so, like, makes so much more sense the way he says it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he does say later, in talking about there does exist an absolute goodness, and it must hate most of what we do. A couple of sentences further, God is the only comfort. He is also the supreme terror, the thing we most need and the thing we most want to hide from. He is our only possible ally, and we have made ourselves his enemies, which is that constant dichotomy as humans, right? Like, he has created this ultimate good law, and we constantly, like back in chapter 1, like, there is a universal moral law and we don't follow it. We don't. So it's this God who created everything and is good and made beautiful things is also merciless. There's also horrible things that are in the world. He's no friend to man, for the universe is very dangerous and terrifying place. It's just a way to things that we know about this God who created or this somebody, as he says at this point, who created this moral law. And then at the end, it's after you've realized that there is a real moral law and a power behind the law, and that you have broken that law and put yourself wrong with that power. It is after all this, and not a moment sooner, that then we can start to talk about Christianity. It's kind of like what we were talking about later. Once you understand there is a moral law, who is behind it, and that we've broken it, then we can start talking about Christianity and the whole point, the whole basic foundation of what the basic mere Christianity is.
Mm-hmm.
When you're sick, you'll listen to the doctor. Right? That's the next sentence.
Yeah,
when you realize that our position is desperate, nearly desperate, you will begin to understand what the Christians are talking about. They offer an explanation of how we got to this point. And
of both hating goodness and loving it.
Hating goodness and loving it. Yep.
I really
how God can be this impersonal mind at the back of the moral law and also a person that we can relate to. Oh, we're getting into it now, guys.
Yeah. Well, I don't
Was
know
there
where
anything else from this chapter that we didn't touch on that you wanted to?
Not necessarily about this chapter, but I was just saying that, like, I don't know where he's going to go from here, but I really like that he just started out with this, like, basic foundation. Because I think a lot of books jump right into the beliefs. And if you were to pick this up as a non-Christian and didn't have any, or even a new Christian, haven't had a lot of, like, you know, Sunday school or things like that, reading, he gives you basic principles to start with. Like, I don't know. I just feel like his building blocks are there, and I really appreciate that, instead of jumping right into, like, what Christians believe. Like, let's lay down this thing that everybody knows about. Even if you're not Christian, you know about what's right or wrong.
Right.
Well, I think the fear is that when you are trying to understand something, that you're going to be put down at the get-go. Like, you don't know this, well, you're not going to understand this. So, and this is what I want you to know and learn. Yeah. He's putting it out there like, anyone, this is for anyone. And what you take from this is up to you. I'm laying it out there. I think, and this is just me saying this, but sometimes I feel and I think we talked about this in the very beginning, this connotation of this Christian word has been so almost vilified in the sense that, well, you're just going to try to shove stuff down my throat and tell me how it is, and that I'm evil and I'm going to hell. Yeah. This book is it's just there. And he's so humble about it. And he just says, here you go.
Yeah. And really, I feel like this book is especially for those that don't feel as confident in their faith. You know, like it's almost like, you know, come and hear about this brand new thing, you know, like it'll feel like a brand new thing to you, and that's fine. Like, he's like inviting you into that kind of thing where it's like, you know, this is for those that have a long history of being Christian, and this is for people that have no history of being Christian. Like, this is for everyone, and he's going to start at the very beginning. Yeah, I think that's really cool. And I love that it's not connected to the Church of England or the Anglican Church or this denomination or that denomination. Like, we're not even at the point where we're specifically talking about Christianity. We are just establishing that there is this moral law, and that, like, we're just establishing a foundation before anyone can understand what Christianity is. These are some things that need to be understood first. And it's not because a church is telling you so, or a pastor is telling you so, or whatever. Like, these are just truths. And here's why. Like, here's some examples and some logic. Let me get you to understand that this is true. I love that. And I think I think we're going to get into a little bit more specific about the Christian faith. But I think if we remember that analogy from the beginning of the hallway, like,
I feel like the different denominations are kind of like different rooms. And somebody being in a different room doesn't mean they're not in the house with you, right? I have an example of this. The first time that I like fully understood what this means, I went on a missions trip. I had a roommate when I was in Bible college for a year and a half, and my roommate was from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I went that summer to help her at a camp that she runs. And in Bosnia at the time, there were no Methodist missionaries and such missions, like all from these different denominations. They all came and worked for the Evangelical Church of Bosnia. So no matter what denomination they came from in the States, they all came and worked with this one, because there were so few Christians in the whole country that missionaries would come from a Mennonite church or from a Methodist church or from the Baptist church or whatever and work together to share Christ with people who literally, the first time I ever drove through a place and the woman driving us said, there are no Christians in this town. And I was like, wait a minute, like nobody, they knew there were so few Christians in the whole country that they knew that this town doesn't have anybody who believes in Christ. I was like, what? Like, I just had never been to a place like that. And it was so beautiful to me to see the body of Christ, like the house in this analogy from this book, right? Like the house of Christianity working together. They might have lived in different rooms in the States, but when they came to Bosnia, they all went back into the hallway and said, we need to get people into the house. And then from there, it was just so beautiful to me to see the body of Christ working like that, because in the States, there's a tendency towards so much division and holding so tightly to those extra beliefs that this is bringing us back to what are those core things to believe that we all believe that are just truth, no matter what you believe about this item of doctrine or this item of doctrine or this, like, let's get back to making the main thing. Like,
right.
I don't know. It just was so cool. So I'm really excited to continue this discussion with everybody. It's going to be good. Thanks, guys, for coming and sharing your thoughts and highlighting what stands out to you. And I'm really excited this week. We are diving into book 2, which I don't know. I haven't even looked at it. It's probably not super long. This section wasn't super long.
Pretty short.
It's about 33 pages.
Yeah.
In my book.
Yeah, same. So it's not super long. You may see some of these guys. You might see some other people with us next week. I'm hoping to have a mixture of voices sharing our thoughts throughout the month. But we will meet back here next Sunday. We did pretty good, an hour and a half. I'm very proud of us. I just appreciate you guys so much, and your voice and your opinions and your perspective. I think it's so important in a book like this to just have more than just my voice or one person's voice. And I think it helps me to process, to just hear what stands out to other people. And I don't know, to talk through it with everybody. I appreciate you guys a lot. So thank you for joining me. And in the comments too, I appreciate you guys sharing what stood out to you and being a part of the conversation. I couldn't share all the thoughts on the screen because I was in it. But I hope you enjoyed our time together. And I hope everybody has a wonderful week.
Thank you, Krista.
Yeah, thank you, Krista, for inviting us.
And this will be saved. And again, I will put the study guide that I found. I'll put the link to that in the description of this video once it processes or whatever and goes live. Not goes live, but goes onto my channel. And I think to get to the lives, you just have to click lives instead of videos on somebody's page, right? To find the lives, it'll save automatically, but it will be there. If you came in late or you know somebody else who wanted to join but couldn't be here, it will be there on the channel to watch later. And yeah, that's all. See you guys next Sunday. Bye. Have a wonderful week, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Okay.